evening to actually be able to put on the seminar in regards to Fatca and the updates that have since happened. Of course, we always seek to ensure that our membership is well versed in regards to what is going on within our industry. Fatca, of course, being very important, as well as the IGA, and of course, the actual signing of an IGA is on everyone's agenda. Today, we are going to have some experts actually provide us with those updates, and hopefully in regards to the date when we're going to be able to sign the IGA. In fact, that's the only reason I got let out of my office, to get that information. And also where you should be in your various institutions, where you should actually be at this point in regards to Fatca. Please feel free to ask the questions. No question is too simple. We have the experts here. This is the time for you to ask whatever questions you have. So, without further ado, we're going to begin now. So thank you very much. I'm so sorry. We're going to start with none other than the Honorable Minister, L. Ryan Kunda, Minister of Financial Services. So please welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This has been quite a week for financial services. And it's very clear today where everybody's mind is at with respect to what they're interested in. I've never seen in all of the Fatca briefings and educational matters and everything else such a full room. It must be April. I want to welcome you certainly on behalf of the Ministry of Financial Services, who's always there to support the Bahamas Association of Compliance Officers and everything they do to this Fatca briefing. Fatca is fast coming, and it would appear that Fatca is not going to be delayed on its implementation. So I'm sure that is why we have some maybe 200 people here in the room to hear about, I guess, where we are and where the government is with respect to matters related to Fatca. And Director Lowell will bring you some of the details. But rest assured that the Bahamas will be on time and delivered according to what the requirements are from the United States with respect to an intergovernmental agreement. And nothing has changed. We're still under a Model 1, non-reciprocal agreement, and we will have it in place in due time to meet all of the deadlines that are put in place by the IRS and the Treasury, although they seem to be moving those deadlines a little bit and making it even a little bit more flexible for countries to be signatories to the IGA. And I think Dr. Lowe will highlight and update you on some of those. But we certainly look to do so in a collaborative fashion with the private sector and to give you the confidence that we, the government, are on time and will deliver and make sure that the parameters of what we need to do are in place. One thing I think that we could use some dialogue on between the government and the private sector, because we've seen the countries taking somewhat different positions, is with respect to the type of guidance that you need or you think you need as a private sector. We've seen countries like the Cayman Islands who are taking an approach in which they are formulating their guidance for industry. And we've seen countries like Bermuda, I think it was Bermuda, who said, we believe that the IRS guidance is enough and we don't have to issue any guidance for the private sector, just adopt that. And in certain instances, I don't think, maybe guidance isn't necessary, but in certain instances, maybe you believe that some more refined and defined guidance on implementation is necessary. And we would, in any question and answer, dialogue that goes on, or feedback prospectively coming forward, I think it's important to hear from you as industry on what type of guidance you might want the government to help formulate with industry with respect to implementation. because certainly, we work in a collaborative fashion, and we will take the lead from what you see as your needs, and work with you in putting that together. I think that's an important component that needs to be said with respect to the implementation process moving forward. So I know you're not here to listen to me bring a welcome and to give you the political assurances that you need, but you want to hear the nuts and bolts of it. And certainly, Director Wall is in a position, I think, to do that next. We've been working very hard, working very collaboratively with the United States, very openly. I must say they have been very, very responsive to us in this regard. Very open to communication and very open to dialogue and responding to our questions and requests. So we believe we have a good footing with the IRS with respect to closing the gaps where we see them. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Dr. Wall to the stage, the podium, to allow her to go through some slides in a frank and open fashion, and allow her to have input and dialogue with you in that regard. So again, Dr. Wall will come forward, and after Dr. Wall, we have certainly the privilege of Charles Diago and team here to be able to bring from an international perspective some of the aspects of Fatca preparedness. Dr. Wall.
Well, thank you, Minister, and good afternoon to all. We are in the home stretch. We have a date for the dance, and so we're really happy to be at this place finally now, and to have, in the next few weeks, hopefully no more than 2 weeks, some very good news. And so my discussion today will really focus on to give you an overview of what we are doing as the Ministry of Financial Services, and then secondly, to give you some guidance on what you should be doing at this point. I know that, as is evident from this room, there is a lot of questions still. We get a lot of calls. On my email, I have my cell phone, and I get them throughout the day and night. So I know that there are questions, and we're happy to answer them. And but we really wanted to impress upon you at this point in time what we think where you should be and what you should be doing along the line. And so what have we been doing for the last year? Certainly, we met with the IRS and Treasury in March of 2013, and we have been, as Minister mentioned, in constant dialogue with them through the process. And what we thought was we have the technology. Just the next slide. Technology problem, somehow the slides didn't get onto the flash drive, but I'll just do it. We have over the last year really been building a good dialogue with the United States Treasury, and really over the time period trying to understand what Fatca is. We had, just as late as Monday, the opportunity to speak with the original drafter of the Fatca regulations and the IGAs to really give an overview of what Fatca is. And so we know that Fatca is a U.S.-driven, Congress-driven concept, and was really imposed upon the Treasury Department to implement within the confines of the Fatca law. It, as you said, is not a extraterritorial, imperialist mandate of the United States, but it does target U.S. paying agents, but because the world is so familiar with the United States, it affects everybody in a very direct manner. IGAs really are the way that Treasury came up with in order to make Fatca workable for jurisdictions. And what we found is that there is a narrow scope for negotiation, and it's tied with the Fatca law. So we have scope with things which we can change, particularly in our annexes, but certain aspects of the IGAs, which are directly from the U.S. Regulations and Fatca law, are not able to be changed through negotiations. But the Bahamas really began with a bold interaction with the U.S. Treasury. We were able to get in, as you have heard many times now, the trustee document of trust and sponsored investment entities. And we are also, through our working group, which some of you participate in, making sure that we cover and explore similar products. And so a new area that was brought to our attention about a month ago was to make sure that foundations were similarly treated as trusts. We are exploring this issue actively right now. Earlier this morning, we had a very good conference call with the Treasury Department to look at how do we make sure that foundations are given similar treatment as trusts. And so we are looking at whether they would be captured under the sponsored investment entity concept, or whether we need to specifically break those out and have a sponsored foundation category where the foundation agent, who would be an FFI, would be the sponsoring entity. And so we'd like to thank industry for those types of comments. Even at this late hour, we are looking at things like this so that we can incorporate and we get the best possible Fatca agreement that we could achieve for the Bahamas. We are not, as a ministry, prepared to accept whatever is provided, but we are prepared to put our best foot forward and negotiate the best agreement that we can have. And so, yes, it's taken some time, but we feel that we have, through the dialogue, through really understanding what Fatca is, carving out the best agreement we can possibly get. And of course, it benefits the world because everything that we negotiate is included in the new model, is updated, but we want to make sure that things for our industry are included, and our minister is not shy to ask for what his industry needs. We also wanted to make sure that we took the time to understand what is required. When we spoke to, I spoke to a body like this last in this very same room in January for STEP. We were under the impression, based on what we had seen from Cayman and Mauritius and some others, that we needed to deal or tinker with our TIA. And certainly under the Fatca models, you know that there's the non-reciprocal with an existing TIA or DTA. And what would have had to happen was that if you're going to base your IGA on a TIA, you had to include a provision for Fatca, or as Cayman had done, an automatic exchange, a new article in your TIA. And we put that out to the audience, and we got responses. And from that, we heard that there was a little discomfort with that. And so we went to explore that further. And so, we are happy to say that, we asked the question, and that, we looked at it, we explored, we negotiated. And from what we've come up with now is that the Bahamas will be able to enter into a Model 1 agreement that's a standalone agreement, with not requiring any changes to the TIA. But everything that relates to the Fatca will be incorporated into the IGA. And so, we have a standalone IGA, and that will be supported by domestic legislation without the need to make any changes, inclusions of automatic exchange information, for example, in the TIA. And so we were happy with that result. We noted that several countries went about and actually signed new tiers at the same time that they signed their IGA. And so we wanted to make sure that that was the best possible route. And so we found a different route, and we're happy with that outcome. We also wanted to make sure that we had a full understanding of the process. And so up until yesterday, everyone had the 25th of April deadline to make that June listing for your July withholding. And so that was definitely a target date for us. And it still remains a target date for us. We received lots of calls. What do I do now, given this deadline, given that the Bahamas isn't included on the list of countries which have been concluded an IG agreement? Do I go ahead and register? How does it work? And so we continue to engage as late as at an automatic exchange of information working group in Paris. That was last week. Through the powers of WhatsApp, we were able to get our people who are representing the Bahamas there to pull aside the right people from the U.S. side to ask the question, what do we do? And so, we made it known that countries and certainly the Bahamas had concern, our licensees and our FFIs had concern about what do you do? You're in the process of negotiating, but you're not yet ready. And so the response to us was that, yes, okay, firms could register as the participating FFIs, that's your non-IGA country or Model 2 type of category, and that they could change at some later date when you have concluded your IGA to the registered deemed compliant FFI category. But we were told that if you go ahead and choose that route, and there would certainly, as we have indicated our intention to move to Model 1, you would be at the time of signing as a PFFI, signing into an FFI agreement. And then that would also impose different responsible officer role for that period. As opposed to a Model 1 registered deemed compliant FFI, which has the signing off officer is really a registration officer to get the CHIN component of it. But they would allow you to go back into the portal and to switch over at the time when your government has concluded an FFI agreement. Of course, everything changed yesterday, and of course we like to think we had something to do with that. But yesterday, the IRS came up with its statement 2014-13, which said basically that as long as your country has an agreement in effect, so it doesn't necessarily need to be signed, but it's considered in effect. So both parties have agreed the text of the agreement, and then you have agreed to disclose the text of that agreement. Then your agreement is in effect, and your dates slightly change. So in that case, your FFIs can register by May 5th for your June deadline, or by June 3rd for your July 1 cutoff, which is the withholding date. So it gave a little bit of time, and that was, we understand their constraints. Because they do have in the Fatca legislation itself, U.S. legislation, that July 1st hard date. So there's nothing much they can tinker with there, but they were able to get their Fatca registration portal system and everything working to a place where they could register and get that GIN and everybody in the system and on the list a little bit quicker. And there was also some leeway given for countries that were truly working towards achieving the date, given their resource constraints, given the whole world that they're dealing with, but that an agreement was in effect. And so we fully hope and expect to, we go to Washington for a meeting on Tuesday to be able to agree and have something in effect. It needs to be agreed by both parties, of course, and then you have your procedures at home, which is for us going through cabinet. For them, afterwards it goes to their State Department to review the actual agreement. And so the process, the dates would be a little bit different, but I think that there is an understanding that, they have 26 6 signed agreements, there's about 45 in effect, and there's a big world, and everyone's trying to get on get a date. So, there is some flexibility there, but, we've got our date now to meet with them one-on-one to work out any issues. With that, I would say also that it's important, that you examine that notice carefully. I know that the FSB sent it around today, and that everyone also have a copy of the Fatca user guide. So I hope that all have seen this already and gone through so you know what the registration form is all about. It's a very helpful document, and it's really helped us in realizing what type of guidance we need to focus on, because what they have out there already. And so I want to look also now into giving you more of an understanding of the Model 1 IGA that we intend to sign, and the various articles of that IGA. And also, we were going on the basis of the Model 1 non-reciprocal with a TIA. Now we're going on Model 1 IGA, it's a standalone without a TIA. But you have at first the recital text, which sets out the legal basis of the exchange of information. Previously we had thought it was the TIA, now we have a standalone agreement. It sets out some common principles and goals underlying the TIA, one of which is international tax compliance. And for us, we see this, and one of our negotiating points is that we would like it to be an agreement to implement Fatca. It's a non-reciprocal. We see the whole issue of international tax compliance as a broader issue for another venue, another forum. But this is part of our negotiating elements. It sets out confidentiality principles and also the reasons behind why there is an IGA to address domestic, they call it legal impediments, we call it Arkansas laws. When we look at Article 1, and this is something that you should all be familiar with, because it sets out the definitions of financial institutions. So there are 4 basic categories. The custodial institution, where you hold financial assets. It's a substantial portion of your business to do so, 30% of those 3 years. Depository institutions, that's fairly clear, your banking and similar types of organizations. You have investment entities, trading, so that's conducting investments, part of your business. And then you also have your specified insurance company. And so it's specified because it's a limited group of insurance companies which basically deal with insurance products that can convert to a cash value contract or an annuity contract. So something where you can sort of store and transfer value that way. So those are your 4 types that are defined. So if you fit within that, you are an FFI under Fatca, and so you need to be looking into what you're doing. Obviously, you all believe you fit within that. It goes on to look at your what is a financial account, and so it's an account basically in any of the above. And there's also the sort of the avoidance clause, which means that any account that has been created or established to avoid dealing with Fatca, they capture it. So it's a broad clause, so no fancy products, nothing. If it's one account in one of the above, or anything you've done to avoid being one of the above. So that's a pretty standard clause. It introduces the concept of who is the account holder, and so there you have the issue of control, which is important. Another issue is who is a U.S. person, and that's defined, and it's broader, as you all know. So a citizen or resident, U.S. taxes on global income, so you're either a citizen or you are a resident with a certain amount of days in the U.S., you're a U.S. person, you're a corporate, or someone who's organized under the laws of the United States. You are a trust if basically the decisions or the management of the trust has U.S. control. And so that's sort of who you're looking for now. That's your U.S. person you're looking for. And it narrows it further into who is a specified U.S. person. So basically, as you code through your accounts, you're looking for U.S. persons who it seems don't already have some type of reporting relationship with the IRS, or who are not exempt, or who under various IRS statutes. And so this specified U.S. person is used to determine who is your U.S. reportable account. Article 1 continues with important issues related to, who is a related party. Again, the concept of control. The controlling person is defined, and they even go so far as to mention it with respect to a trust. So that's specifically spelled out there, statutory trustees, protectors, things like that. And then also you have your terms that are not defined. Basically, it defaults to the country which has the terms. So, I've mentioned before, I guess that's the Bahamas definition. Article 2 goes on to your obligations to obtain and exchange information. So what do we as a government need to share with the United States? And what do we as a government need to get from you? So there are 5 basic pieces of information. So your identification information on your needs.
I'm just wondering, where are you getting this information? Is this a leaflet that we should have received that you're basically referring to?
This is a detailed analysis of the Model 1 IGA agreement. If you go onto Treasury's website, and I think the FSB may have sent it out some time ago as well, but they have all of the model templates of the IGAs. We are now looking at the Model 1 IGA, non-reciprocal, without a T.
Okay.
So that's the basic document, and there are annexes to go with that every license, every FFI needs to have right now. It's going to be tailored some based on a negotiation, but you have the base documents.
Okay.
So you have your ID documents, you have account number, you need the name and GIN of the FI, account balance or value or gross interest, and then for custodial accounts, basically the taxable value associated with that account. Article 3 deals with the time and manner of the exchange of information. So what does a government have to do? What we are committing to as a government to exchange with the U.S. in the time frame. It is a staggered approach over a few years. So basically our first exchange is September 2015. So by that date, we have to have our Fatca system built out because we have to be ready to go. And so it's with respect to now 2014 accounts. So it's your core ID information and account balance information. And if they give a little leeway, so by 30th of June, for those accounts, so that's your pre-existing accounts, if you don't already have your TIN for those persons, it's the date of birth that you can share. By September 2016, it expands, and so that's on your 2015 accounts. So it's all of the ID information, your basic information, and then you look at interest payments as well. And then 2017, it's sort of like the full factor, all of the information in the ID, and that's the way forward. So that would be what the government of the Bahamas would commit to share with the United States in that sort of time frame. Article 4 basically says, what do FFIs have to do to be compliant? And so to be considered as a reporting FFI, remember that this has an implication because if you are basically a non-participating one and withholding kicks in, if you are a reporting FFI, you need to identify and report to the government of the Bahamas in accordance with the IGA. You have to also report the name of any non-participating FFIs. So if you are making payments to any FFIs or financial institutions who are not participating in the Bahamas or otherwise, the name and the value of those payments you've made. So that's a separate little category in your spreadsheet to put in there. You have to have complied with registering on the IRS portal. And so here, this document will tell you all that you need to do for that. If you are a QI, you need to, of course, fulfill any of your withholding responsibilities. And if you are not a QI and you make payments to any basically non-participating, you need to also disclose that as well. So Article 4 is very clear what it means to comply with FATCA.
But you also have to report that you are performing.
Yes, you have to actually report. Yes. Okay. Article 4 also says that, there's no requirement to close or withhold from a recalcitrant account so long as the U.S. receives information on it ultimately. And so that's dealt with in another clause, but you have, basically, because it's a Model 1, it's a government agreement supported by Bahamian law. Therefore, you are accountable to the Bahamas government. We make a law that says you must report. And so, barring the person is not a U.S. person or is just not the right person, if you've identified that indicia, it must be reported. Article 4, strangely enough, throws in retirement plans and just sort of excludes those that are regulated or have some contract. I don't know why it's in there in that place, but because it's in there, as mentioned, we are looking at any potential legislative action necessary for pension funds, and we brought this up already to the Attorney General's office and the Ministry of Finance, just to make sure that our pension funds are in a good place and that they're working on legislation there. And Article 4 also clearly states that if you have a related FI, so you have a related entity that cannot comply, you are still compliant. But if you make any payments to that related FI that is not participating, then you need to report also. That's another column in the spreadsheet to say report that information. Article 5 deals with collaboration and compliance. And so for that, our concern there was that we wanted, one of the factors when we chose Model 1, we wanted as a government to be the ones to interact with our financial institutions. And that clearly was what was said to us in our meeting right here, I guess, in May or so of 2013. And so the original IGA Model 1 had the IRS able to contact the FIs for minor issues, but that's now been amended. We mentioned that to them that was an issue, but that's been amended throughout. And so any minor administrative errors, so you've gotten wrong TINs or something, or it just something doesn't look right with a minor error, they will notify the government, you will notify you. And but for significant areas of non-compliance, so you have, because the way it's set, FATCA is set up, there is going to be overlap in reporting. There's jurisdictionally, you've got related parties, you've got entities that are administered here, but somewhere else, actually registered somewhere else. So there's some overlap. And so if they're finding that, an entity is supposed to actually have XYZ number of accounts, but they only are not reported at all, that entity is in significant non-compliance. So because it's a FATCA law domestically, they're in non-compliance with our law as well. And so what the IJ does, it gives 18 months to resolve the issue. And otherwise, if it's not resolved, if it's a court issue or whatever, we have 18 months to resolve it. And otherwise, the entity is no longer participating at the FI and withholding occurs. So I guess you lose your gym. That article also states that third-party service providers can be used to do the FATCA compliance, and but the responsibility remains on the FI. So I think that's good for independent compliance officers as well. And it also mentions that the Bahamas must prevent practices that circumvent FATCA. So we explored that earlier today about what that actually meant. They actually said, you need to have the non-avoidance clause in the law. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have penalties, but that you should have a non-avoidance clause in the law. And so we are looking at that as we draft our legislation as well. Article 6 deals with a mutual commitment to enhance exchange of information. And so one issue that's brought up in Fatca is the issue of these forward pass-through payments and so on. And that's an issue which is being looked at, not just within Fatca, but beyond. But it certainly is mentioned in the Fatca legislation. And so we initially, wondered whether we had some flexibility there, but it is in the Fatca legislation. And so we realized that we have to deal with that in our Article 6. But there's also a larger commitment to the common reporting and exchange model, and mentions made of OECD, EU, and other bodies. And so that's an area that we are looking at more closely with that. There is also in Article 6 a commitment to obtain TINs by January 2017, so that will have to be added to now your compliance regime. Article 7 is your most favored nations clause. Article 8, and so that just means that anything that one country negotiates that's more favorable goes to everybody else. So that's how our trust got to go global. Article 8 deals with consultations, and how we go about that. Then we have 9, which are basically saying that the annexes form an integral part of the agreement. And then Article 10 deals with how we get out of the agreement. And so basically there's a 12 months notice to terminate, and that in any case, we're going to look at it again in 2016. Because we are now looking at a standalone agreement, confidentiality provisions will be brought into the agreement. We will rely on the TIA confidentiality agreement. We'll put it right into our IGA. And also the competent authority aspects of it, so that we have a competent authority agreement will be brought directly into the IGA as well, so that it's not in the TIA that we're relying on it. Everything is in the actual IGA. So the competent authority agreement is really just the nuts and bolts of how we go about talking to each other. Is it writing? Is it, can we talk on the phone? Things like that. So we'll bring that in. So when we look at annexes, in terms of Annex 2, relevance to everyone, of course, is the trustee documented trust, something that the ministry was pleased to get in. And we have under Model 1, it's deemed the trustee documented trust, so a trust with a corporate trustee who would be an FFI normally, is deemed compliant under Model 1 if that trustee basically sponsors the documentation. And so that trust, which is a vehicle to us, there's no need to register or report if there's no U.S. ownership.
So that's what the trustee is incorporated.
Yes.
Now, what is the community?
Under Fatca, the regulations, the individual is not even captured. They specifically looked at corporate trustees. And in conversations with persons on Fatca, it was noted that, maybe they hadn't considered that issue yet, but they were very interested in corporate trustees. And so that's why we brought in the foundations now, because it's a similar structure, just for civil law jurisdictions. Okay. We also got in some new wording on the sponsored investment entity category, so that under the Model 1, which is a little bit more favorable, only if the sponsoring entity identifies any U.S. portable accounts and they report that. So that this category seemed to fit with private trust companies, the master feeder fund structures, and so those, the sort of the U.S. tax incentive for the non-U.S. components, no need to register and report on those. And so what should you be doing? I don't know what happened to my slides. That was strange. What should you be doing? So, I came up here with my Fatca registration user guide, and you should all have a copy of that. It's very robust, and so you'll see it really goes through in detail how to register. And it's perhaps the easiest thing to read I've ever seen them do. So I think all compliance officers need to be looking through this right now. If you're not getting them already, but you definitely sign on to the, RSS feeds from Treasury so that you get your alerts, your IRS and Treasury alerts on Fatca, so that you know any changes as they go along. I would ask you to also review the Annex 2s, just to make sure you know what are the exempt products. And, besides really the trust and funds and investment entities, there aren't a lot, but, even we had a discussion yesterday with some of our Canadian people who were here from another conference, and, there's this majority sort of local commercial, FFI, and which would fit sort of our commercial banks with a 80% local component. But, if you have you've identified officially one, U.S. person, then you may still need to register to report that person. I would also ask that you review Annex 1 to learn about your compliance responsibilities under Fatca. And then I have a snapshot of some of the registration information. But the Fatca user guidelines really helps you. I thought they laid out quite clearly, what your status is. Are you a single FFI? Are you a lead donor? Are you a member FFI? A sponsoring FFI? So it gives you good definitions to those types of things. And we'll probably list those for our guidance because I think they were very clear. And that was quite helpful for us. In terms of the Annex 1 review, and so, and this is perhaps most germane to compliance officers because you're the gatekeeper and you're the one looking out for U.S. indicia. The Annex 1 really lays out quite clearly. It's a little dense and sort of littered with U.S. tax code things. But you could decipher through that. And but when we do get to the slides, it will say basically you have your pre-existing accounts, and those are accounts as at 30th of June. So under 50,000, there's no need to review, identify, or report them. So those are sort of your example by de minimis rules. Over 50,000 though, but under 1 million, you have to do your electronic record search to determine if you have U.S. indicia. And if U.S. indicia is found, but the account holder or owner claims not to be U.S., then you have to take steps to make sure that they're not. You have your high value accounts over 1 million, electronic record search as well, and you also require to do a paper search, and also it puts the onus on the relationship manager to know, you have to do inquiry to know what those are really who this is about. It says you must monitor for account balance changes, and so you have to build into your systems all of those types of monitoring for to make sure you can know where your U.S. indicia, and to see are you having some accounts that start low but are recently changed to low, and so that you understand and make sure and have a good faith knowledge of whether these are reportable accounts. For new accounts or accounts opened after July 1st, again, you have your $50,000 de minimis rule, and that's also the same for any insurance contracts. There's a self-certification to determine U.S. status, so you really should be getting, upfront, who are you, what's your citizenship, and that type of information. You got to get the TIN, and you've got to build it into your AML KYC requirements. And if there's doubt, there is an onus. If there's doubt, get to the original certification, do it again. There is also clearly outlined in that annex the rules for entity accounts. And so for your pre-existing accounts, there's a slightly higher threshold of $250,000 for no review or reporting. But reporting for these pre-existing accounts is required over $250,000 as of 30th of June. or for an account that's like changing value. So it's an account which is low value, it goes to over 1 million on the last day of 2015. And so basically you've got to determine whether the entity account is owned by a U.S. person, and you have your definitions, by a passive, non-financial foreign entity, FE, controlled by U.S. person. So really you're looking for a U.S. nexus. For new accounts, the threshold goes back to that 50,000 K, even for entity accounts, where that's the de minimis rule, and then over 50K entity accounts, you do the same types of reviews. And so, again, just as an update on where we are, we have entered into our discussions now with the United States, and we are at the final leg of that. We've identified our key areas and causes. We are looking for an agreement that implements Fatca. We think that there are other forums for other types of agreements, and the government of the Bahamas will take that on as in its appropriate time. We are drafting our Fatca legislation, and we're currently reviewing vendors to design a Fatca implementation system, and actually our shortlist should be released on those vendors tomorrow with our shortlist of vendors. Our legislation will outline, basically it's a very simple legislation. We've looked at, so far, in terms of English-speaking countries, the UK is the furthest along. So we looked at what they have. Canada just released theirs as well. So it really specifies what information is to be kept. It compels the financial institution to undertake your Annex 1 due diligence procedures. It compels you to send in the information to the competent authority, who will be the Ministry of Finance. And it allows the Ministry of Finance, competent authority, to send on that information to the IRS. And it also defines the penalties for non-compliance. There will be a subsequent competent authority agreement that we will work together to with Treasury to define how we interact with each other. And we will be, as the Minister mentioned, developing our sector guidelines. And a lot of the questions that we've been fielding so far relate to, is this entity captured in my industry? Where is it captured? Those types of questions where we need to look at specifically. I remember we had a speaker at the PFSB Summit back in January mentioned that, when they mapped out what you need to do for a trust, it was a very long series of questions. And so things like that we are looking to do. So we have received nominations based on our small working group, and we have persons from industry to help us with that, to work hand in hand with the Ministry of Financial Services in the development of those specific questions. We are, of course, we work for industry, we represent, we're not in industry, so the questions that you have are relevant. And we encourage you to send those in so that we can think through that process. In our working group meeting, someone mentioned, what about managed banks? And how does that work? And, we just have to think through the process. And so the questions that you are getting, I guess, from your bosses or from your clients, I think those are things which will help us inform our guidelines, because the U.S. has told us that they're not issuing any comfort rulings, so you got to get it right, or you're not, or not in compliance. So those are the things that we have to think about. So that's the difference between the approach we're going to take and what Bermuda has said. For example, look at the U.S. guidance, read their rules, read the regulations. It's there. And he said, we'll give industry a little bit more guidance in the way we approach it. So as I mentioned, we have the Fatca system, the reporting system. We are now looking at the vendors to get that process moving on. We'll probably bring in someone to manage that process for us as well. But we have received the bids, we've reviewed them now. The short list is coming out tomorrow. The next step is vendor demonstrations, when we get a look at what a possible product would look like. and we choose one vendor and work with them through the product development process. That will, of course, involve industry because, you know, we want to make sure that we develop something that's easy for you to use. It's not a lot of cost for you to implement. It's a portal. Send us the information. We may do some data validation and we send it on. And we would do extensive rollout and testing of the products and then like this guidance on how to use our products. That's okay, so I'll get the question.
In the meantime, then, should we register to avoid withholding out of July? If we register today, we have to register here and then avoid withholding out of July. So that just seems to be an active process. Otherwise, we would have to wait for, otherwise we'd be waiting on this system to.
No. You're just waiting for us to say we have an agreement of fact, which is, and not even design, just to have the agreement of fact, which means, you know, we go there, in substance, so we agree it amongst ourselves, we agree to publish what we have, and then we agree to let the process work itself out. And we have a tight implementation schedule now that we have our data. You know, so April 8th is our, you know, meeting. We've been, you know, we've gotten review and look at our text already. We know what the issues are. We've worked through some of them today and got some good progress. There are many issues we hope to conclude next week Tuesday. And then from there, it's, you know, once those parties agree and sign off, basically an agreement, you know, in substance. And so, you know, that's where we hope to be. So, you know, I would say that, you know, we had hoped, this session was, you know, next week or so. But, you know, we tried, so we wanted to have some other things to tell you. But, you know, so I'd say let us go through our Washington process. You know what you have to do to register. It's not an expensive process. You know, and so you know what you have to do to prepare for that. But let us work through this so you don't have to be switching over, and it's sort of messier that way.
You have to switch over anyway.
Well, no. Once we get an agreement in effect, say let's look at that on Tuesday, you register as your GM compliant. And, you know, that's clear. And there's no, like, responsible officer in an interim and switch over. Right. So it's, you know, and that has certain responsibilities and you have an equitable agreement with that. Well, we will have a contact person for you, okay? We're not going to make a legislation that is more draconian than the U.S. version of it. And so it's, you know, even within U.S. Fatca, you know, what we've been told in the 544 pages, within that itself, you know, there's no like criminal penalty things that aren't so severe. It's in other parts of the U.S. tax code where it is. So, you know, in designing our legislation, we have to, you know, we're considering that in terms of getting the right balance. We have to, of course, have anti-avoidance rules in the regulation, and it has to have teeth because you have to comply with that. That's one of the, you know, we want to have, you want to report to us, or, you know, we have to make sure that we can fulfill our end of the bargain with the U.S. So, you know, that's the sort of delicate, you know, thing that we're thinking through right now in terms of how do we design a legislation that has sufficient teeth but doesn't go beyond what even the Fatca regulations has.
Okay, that is my final question. Sorry, my final question. Will there be a separate inspection process for Fatca?
such as the one we looked at on Pennsylvania State, that we have a separate inspection process as well.
Yeah, we've been discussing that in our working group. And, what we thought is that, I know I was involved in the corporate governance, sheet that our, at least banks, trust companies use, the certification every year. But that a good thing would be to, add an additional checkbox to say, are you complying with the Fatca law, type thing. So as part of your sort of director certification, things like that, to add it in there. Of course, there would be a role for the regulators. And this is my initial thoughts on that in terms of how you make sure that it's actually being done. Because we do have a responsibility at the end of the day to our Fatca partner to make sure that the treaty, it's not a treaty that, but it's a treaty, the agreement is fulfilled. So, we'll have to design the team and the enforcement mechanism to make sure it is.
That will also depend on how our laws will determine then what the regulator will do as far as audit purpose for Fatca.
Roger, just to rewind for a second, of the 26 countries that have signed the IPA, the 19 are in the process of signing the IPA. The Bahamas is on that list, I think that's the point we used yesterday. So then I guess my question is, how confident are you after the water that there will be a signed IPA shortly thereafter, so that we can register and report a model one at the bottom?
I mean, we're very comfortable, we're very close, and so it's, a few clauses that we're working on right now. And, of course, we know how important this is, but if we believe it's important to get it right too. And so we also know that withholding is a big mess. It will work itself out eventually, but it's a big mess. So, and it's a big mess to the U.S. side as well. They don't want this. They don't want to pull over the world. And, 45 countries is a lot. So, so I think there's goodwill on both sides. And so, we know what we want. We know there's negotiation. We know that they are limits because they are constrained. And so we will make a good faith effort to negotiate properly. We are happy with what we've achieved so far. I think we've made good wins in terms of not just rolling over and accepting it. We did not have to change the PIA. We've gotten our trusts taken care of, and so we're happy there. So and now we're going to try and get the other things that we're doing.
Generally, the idea is that there will be an agreement in substance, even if the agreement is not actually signed, so that we will be in compliance.
Yes, no, very much. Well, thank you, everyone. And of course, we are always available for questions, and you can always email me, and you'll have the presentation to Fatca members as well. Definitely the technical picture. But if you don't have this, please look at it. Donna, did you send it out? Okay.
I made that to be said.
Okay, thank you.
That's the number.
Yeah. Thank you, Donna.
Just before Nicholas goes up, are there actually any more questions? This is the time. Yes, we have two.
I have a question concerning sponsorship. The site, the portal doesn't seem to accommodate a bank that wants to be a sponsor of a mutual fund under its administration. It kind of dies away.
Okay.
Secondly, on the general question of sponsorship, how do you see the responsibility of the sponsoring bank? For example, what do you think the professional indemnity insurance people might say when you say you are taking responsibility for the Fatca reporting of 50, 60, 100 mutual funds under your administration. Have you given any thought or discussed it?
Actually, we haven't on that side. It is in terms of a business risk, you are committing to do due diligence on behalf of another entity. I'm just thinking through in terms of your liability. At the end of the day, you will be found, if you're not doing a good job, non-compliant, and kicked out as a sponsoring entity. And so it's I imagine there may be some risk if your the entity sue you, so that's, but from the government, you'll be kicked out of the system if you're found not to be doing the role you say you didn't do the due diligence. So again, the penalty side of it is something that we haven't worked out yet, but the liability side, perhaps negligence, is something we have to consider.
Just real quickly, where you spoke about the compliant position, if you sign on as deemed compliant, we no longer require the responsible officer function.
Right, and actually Cayman, Cayman actually just proposed it. They clarified the role of the responsible officer given by Model 1. It was exactly what we had been told in March or April, that as a Model 1 jurisdiction, the role of your contact person in terms of your relationship with the IRS. Your contact person to say, email this person for notices and updates, and this is who we send your TIN information to. You're responsible really to the government of Bahamas, and so it's a different relationship. So that's why the thought was let's give us a week or so to move on this. But if you register, you will have for a week or so until you change it, a responsible officer with duties and laid out in the Fatca regulations. And so it's a difference. So really, you want to be a registered deemed compliant F5. As a Model 1, that's the direction of government. And the responsible officer will follow it. It's a contact person.
More of a point person, and without the serious liabilities attached to the responsible officer that would be reporting directly to the IRS.
And just one other thing, I guess continuing on the question of the sponsoring entity. I also work with an administration company. Our understanding has been that the funds themselves would register and not necessarily, and maybe this is an option, that the funds themselves would register as opposed to us registering as a sponsoring entity for each or for the group of funds.
Right. The fund is an FFI. If it falls, it's an investment entity, it falls under that too. It can register for itself as a single. Or, if you have all of the criteria under the sponsor category, you could do it that way as well. So there's options that are available, but you have to read the Annex 2 really clearly to make sure that you fit one of those. If you want to be exempted, so meaning that the fund itself does not want to go on a list. They could choose to be documented or sponsored by something else if it meets the criteria, and if the FFI who's registering them meets the criteria. There's somewhere it's just you're an F5, some of it's closely held, and so it's very related, a small group of entities together. So there's a lot of nuances there that if you read that Annex 2, just to see where you are, but it could register in its own way.
And would there be any inherent risk as being the administrator of those funds, even if they registered on their own account, being the administrator of them, is there still a risk attached to the administrator?
Yeah. It's not. It's not as much, because what you're doing is you're acting as the agent simply for the registration purpose. As a sponsoring entity, you're not necessarily taking on the liability, you're not taking on the liability of the organization.
Correct.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to think of what liability do you have as a fund administrator? Maybe I have a question for the fund.
You're doing the due diligence, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're saying that liability. I was just trying to see where the fund administrator would have the KYC liability. Because they do have some responsibility.
Right. Well, what happens is that the fund, obviously there are service providers for a fund. So the administrator would fall under being a service provider, as well as director and other services. But even though the fund as a financial institution would be relying on the administrator to carry out the due diligence, do the KYC, et cetera, because that's essentially what the administrator does, the liability still lies with the financial institution, its directors, and the principals. So it would be up to those persons to ensure that the administrator is doing his job, and the administrator should have to sign off on that, and it still doesn't give them the direct liability, but it then allows the fund at least to go after the administrator in some vein in order to.
Okay, so then they administrators may not have to register.
Unless they decide to act as a sponsoring entity.
Okay.
You may not want to do that.
I just want to know I still want to stay on
We do have some more presentations that I think are going to clarify some more of these questions, and it's going to go a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of how these things actually work, and to center out the present. No further questions for Director Rowe?
We live in Miami, and we work in Miami, and we both work with the association that's seen in the small logo on the bottom left, and that is the Association of Certified Financial Crime Specialists, which we formed about 2.5 years ago. We are also the group that formed ACAM. Some of you may know, and I think a lot of you are members of ACAM, which we formed 13 years ago. And we saw the world changing in the last couple of years. I happen to be just a couple of biographical points about us. I don't know if you have that on you have the slide on. A couple of points about us so that you'll know our background. I happen to be a lawyer, don't hold that against me. And I've had about as diverse a career as you can find, all hovering around, interestingly enough, from my 20s on, around the finances of crime. When I was in my 20s, just as a little background, I worked in the U.S. Congress as counsel to a committee. We were doing an investigation of organized crime, the mafia, Don Corleone. And that's when I first realized how much money crime makes. And in the hundreds of millions of dollars in those days, and that was a few years ago. And it's never, that fascination of the finances of crime has never left me. And it's gone through various permutations. I became a federal prosecutor in the United States in Miami. Prosecuted all kinds of criminals, corrupt public officials, fraudsters, drug traffickers, you name it, Miami has them all. And it's the perfect storm of crime, as many of you know. I also worked as a special counsel on organized crime to the great governor of Florida who just died a couple of weeks ago, former governor of Florida, Governor Reuben Askew, where I wrote the statewide grand jury law to attack, again, the finances of crime. So this subject has remained with me all these years, and that's why we formed this association, because we are in a new world now. We're going through a sea change, and in my 40-some years of involvement in the field, I've never seen anything like it, really and truly. A dramatic sea change, a revolutionary moment that we're going through, and why do I say that? Because of several things. All of a sudden, the world has seemed to realize that there are two major menaces that need a more concentrated attack, and that is the area of public corruption, and secondly, the area of tax evasion. Tax evasion, i.e. Fatca, which is what prompted the enactment of Fatca by the United States Congress in March of 2010. So that realization by the world that those two major menaces need attack is what prompted a lot of what we're seeing today, including the enactment of Fatca. Fatca had two principal causes. Fatca, first of all, for those of you who are just new to the field, stands for the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. How many of you in this room, if I may ask, just so I will get an understanding, we can get an understanding of the level of knowledge that you may have on Fatca, how many in this room have received 3 hours or more of training on Fatca requirements and Fatca provisions and Fatca compliance? That's a goodly number. 3 hours or more, I'd say it was about 20% of the crowd. How many 3 hours or less? That's the rest of you, I guess. I didn't major in math. How many zero training on Fatca? A couple of brave hands raised their hand. Well, we're going to try to reach a level of instruction here that doesn't quite get to a zero level, at the bottom level, but we're going to try to give you as much of the practical information as we can. A couple of the things that are occurring in this field that are causing these changes that I talk about. Fatca is gaining momentum. 60 to 70 countries are now in negotiations with the U.S. Treasury Department. Now, when we say the U.S. Treasury, we really mean the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service is the tax agency of the United States, as all of you know. It's in my opinion, it has the finest financial investigative agency in the world, a subunit called criminal investigation. They're super agents. They know how to track the money down, and they will be the ones who get involved in any revelations that come to the United States authorities from any revelations that you pass on to the IRS, either directly or indirectly. And that's what prompted Fatca, to tell you the truth. What prompted this great momentum we're seeing, two reasons. A, frankly, it's been in the newspapers, it was the revelations that a few of the major Swiss banks, and I'll spare the names today, but you've seen them in the newspaper, revelations that several major Swiss banks, some of them still under grand jury investigation, some 11 or 12 the government says, were harboring secret accounts of U.S. persons, and you notice I don't say citizens. It's not, Fatca is not aimed just at U.S. citizens, but rather at U.S. persons who are subject to U.S. taxation. So if you're a resident of the United States and you're subject to income taxation, then you're covered by the accounts that you may hold in another country. So it was those revelations that outraged the U.S. Congress that came to light in the year 2008, where one of the major Swiss banks was found by a Senate committee to have harbored some 52,000 U.S. persons who had secret accounts in Switzerland and were not paying taxes on them. Now, the amounts there can be staggering, and you can imagine how the U.S. Congress reacted to these revelations. Thank you very much. If you take just 38% of those 52,000 and assume that only 20,000 of those accounts had what we were told was the minimum balance that those accounts must have had at that bank, and you multiply that 20,000 by $5 million, you're talking about $100 billion just in those 20,000 accounts. $100 billion. Now you multiply that times other Swiss institutions that are allegedly doing and were allegedly doing the same thing, and it seems like they were. you're talking about a lot of money. Now, that's only Switzerland. That's only Switzerland. So think about all the other jurisdictions in the world that may have been doing the same thing, and you're talking about a fiscal impact on the U.S. Treasury that goes into trillions of dollars. Now, but it's gone beyond Fatca. It's more than just Uncle Sam now. What happened was that the second major reason why Fatca was enacted was the empty treasuries in European treasuries. Greece, Spain, Italy. Anybody else? Just name them. Empty treasuries. From irresponsibility on their part in large measure, but also from the collapse of the world economy starting in around 2008. So these governments look at their empty treasuries and go, we have no more lira left, no more pesetas, no more this. And so they said, you know, Fatca is not a bad idea. And all of a sudden the European nations, the five big ones, Germany, Italy, France, UK, and Spain, said, you know, we're going to go and join together. Fatca is a pretty good idea, but we don't think it goes far enough. We don't think it goes far enough. We don't want this just, you know, when you ask for it stuff and all these. We just want automatic exchanges on an annual basis so that we can find out who our taxpayers are who are holding secret accounts overseas at another country. So all of a sudden, then the momentum built, and now the OECD says, we want this as the world standard. And by the way, don't think that it's all in that hemisphere. It's not just the U.S. and the West and the East and that hemisphere. A close by neighbor here across the pond a little bit, on our side of the pond, Mexico. Mexico is one of the most aggressive countries, not under Fatca, in the Fatca realm, let's say the Fatca era, and saying, we don't think the United States Fatca goes far enough. So they're saying the same thing, and pretty soon, as the empty treasuries become evident to all these countries, we're going to be seeing the same thing. So the OECD has now issued a document called the Standard for Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information. 44 nations and jurisdictions have already announced early adoption. So ladies and gentlemen, the day is not far when the secret accounts overseas, I don't know what's going to happen really. We're at such an interesting time that I can't, with all my experience in this field, is evident by my gray hair, I can't tell you where we're going to be in 3 years or 5 years with this new sea change that we're seeing today. One thing, by the way, and I'm sorry if this sounds like a little commercial, but if you go to our ACFCS page, acfcs.org, we have a resources page with a lot of Fatca content. And through Latanya Simonet-Tinker, who's sitting here before me, you all know her, we're going to make available to you a password that we will send to you, all of you, as a courtesy password to be able to access all the resources that we have on Fatca, and it's a lot. It's a lot. And in fact, we have a handout today that we're going to email to all of you too, a 2-page outline that will help you consolidate some of these points that we're making today. So, the OECD is moving. Brian, go ahead. It's an aggressive timeline. Fatca is a complex law. I call it, for whatever my opinion is worth, I call it the most important financial crime law enacted in our lifetime. And don't think it's a tax law. In fact, we're going to show you a graph in a second as to how the ground is moving now. And Fatca compliance and Fatca responsibilities have not yet settled in one major element of a financial institution. And when I say financial institution, I'm not just referring to banks. I'm referring to the full range of financial institutions as they are known today, which include broker-dealers, mutual funds, insurance companies, even money services businesses, even, in fact, the United States defines financial institutions as including the Postal Service, because they send money out through money orders and things like that. But you'll see here how widely dispersed the Fatca compliance duties and implementation have been placed. Maybe we ought to keep those doors open back there because it gets a little hot here. Should I impose on you all? Unless people are making a lot of noise out there. It's really hot. You agree? Yes. All right, thank you. maybe one door for all three doors, that would help. So you can see it's in tax, IT, AML, operations, legal, finance, customer services, which is the winner so far. They've messed up our colors here, but the winner seems to be, Brian, what is it, legal? Legal now has, that's where they always dump stuff on the lawyers first. Let the lawyers handle it until the lawyers don't want to do the work, and then they go, no, let's shift it over to so-and-so. So it may end up, the logical place, in my opinion, for it to be, in my opinion, is AML. AML. Huh? It's based on this poll that we took, it's now number 2 and catching up. And in fact, by the way, as you know in the AML field, for those of you who work in AML, how many of you in the room are primarily involved with AML work? It's about half the crowd, I would say. FYI, if you go to the Fatca law as enacted by Congress in March of 2010 when President Obama signed it, the first line that you see as Congress began its description of the law and enacting its provisions is, in the search for beneficial owners, comma, the United States Congress, blah, blah, blah. This law is all about finding beneficial owners of financial accounts and other assets that are covered by it. That's all it is. That's principally what it is. Prompted by A, the scandal involving U.S. taxpayers in Switzerland, and B, the empty treasuries, now on a worldwide basis, the empty treasuries in the other countries. But just a couple of other points. We have a lot to cover and our time is scarce, but something to make you think. The other reason, principal reason why the world is going through a sea change now is because it has become evident to many people, including us, in Miami, in this little laboratory of financial crime that we run over there, that all financial crimes, think about this, all financial crimes, and this is where Fatca comes in handy, we call Fatca the ribbon that ties all financial crimes together. All financial crimes have certain common, constant, permanent, immutable elements. Among them are, A, they all involve money laundering, all of them. B, they all involve tax evasion. At one point or another, somebody's not paying their taxes, i.e. Fatca. C, they all require, unfortunately for you, a financial institution, unless you're dealing with nickel and dime stuff. 4, they all have some interfacing with a government agency, either through reporting or forms that you have to file if you're the unfortunate bank that has to file all these forms, or in a post-crime situation when the investigative agency, like your gendarme or your police, come knocking on your door, or the FBI in the United States, etc. So somewhere along the line, a government agency steps in. So in all those situations, you have to do your job right. You're under the onus of finding the money laundering, finding the tax evasion now under Fatca. What's going to happen under Fatca from a public relations standpoint, by the way, when you report your customers as U.S. persons to your tax authority, and it turns out that that person was hiding criminal proceeds or evading her or his U.S. taxes, and was hiding that money at your institution, or what's going to happen? Is there a possibility with this broad conspiracy law that the United States has that one of your employees might have been involved in advising that customer on how to hide that money? See, so I speak as a lawyer also by telling you that I don't want to dramatize the thing, but I guarantee you that when you're a prosecutor, and boy, it was great power that I had as a prosecutor, you almost get drunk with the power of being able to get anything you want. Anything you want. And if you're a foreign institution that does no business in the United States, we'll get your correspondent accounts and force you to come over and settle it. That's how ample the power is. The other thing you should know, and I've prosecuted people doing this crime too, is that the law, when you sign a form that is going to be submitted to the Internal Revenue Service or to any other United States agency, you sign it whether it's under the penalty of perjury statement that says, I sign and certify that the facts I know are true, correct to the best of my knowledge. When you sign that form, you are subjecting yourself to prosecution, even if not for perjury, for what is known as a false statement that sends you away for 5 years. So, I'm not here to scare you, I'm just here to tell you the realities that you may not hear from time to time, that the tasks that are assigned to institutions, foreign or domestic, are pretty great, pretty complicated, and pretty substantial. So, all these common elements that I talked about have led the world now to a notion of convergence, where institutions and government agencies alike have realized that all these distinct units that they have for money laundering, for fraud, for sanctions, for corruption, for tax evasion, for compliance, they have all these common elements, so why not converge them, and leverage your resources. The talents of one unit can be parlayed onto the other unit, and your software used here can be used for that. And that's the one message that I'd like to really emphasize to you, is that Fatca, in many respects, is the culmination of the responsibilities that you have under various obligations already, so that you should be on the lookout right now, an active search for the resources, the talents, and the other tools that you have that may be leveraged to make compliance with this law, A, more economical. Your board would be happy with that, with all the compliance costs that you already have. More economical, more effective, and certainly more efficient. So that, in my opinion, although we may have other recommendations for you, in my opinion, that should be the first thing. What tools do we have in the toolbox that we've been using for years for other things that might apply to something that pertains to Fatca? So, in any case, compliance steps. I'm going to ask, I'm going to ask my colleague Brian Kendall, who's one of the brains in our association, a public policy major, graduated from Duke University, and it's a great pleasure to work with Brian, who has become, in the last year or more, just quite an expert on Fatca. So I'm beginning to call him Mr. Fatca. Here he is, although he's anything but Fatca. Mr. Slimka.
I don't want to be presented as an expert, because I feel like then someone's just going to ask a question that I will not be able to answer it at all and just look bad. So I'm not a practitioner, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any kind of tax expert, but I will do my best to answer any question you have. Just raise your hand at your point, and I'll try to help you out. When I was coming in to the Bahamas from Miami at the customs desk, the lady said, "Well, what's the purpose of your visit?" The customs officer said, "I'm going to give a presentation about U.S. tax law." And she said, "Wow, that sounds very boring." But I actually find it pretty interesting. So I'll try to make this as interesting as possible, despite the fact that we're talking about that. So we've broken it down into some broad compliance steps here. I'll go through these very broadly, high level, and then I think with Tanya, you're going to step in with some recommendations if you want, and then we'll talk about generally what your obligations are, or what a FFI's obligations are under a Model 1 agreement. So some of that stuff that we were talking about earlier, I'll try to drill down a little bit more on that. We'll go over it again, hopefully give you guys a good idea of what you have to do. And then from there, we'll talk about Fatca forms, what you have to do with those. Maybe talk a little bit about withholding, if anybody wants to talk about that. And we'll just see how much time we have from there. There's lots of stuff we can get through. So, when you're preparing your Fatca compliance program, what should you be thinking about? Well, step one is your internal planning and assessment. And you should probably be there already if you're not done with that. Many of you, I'm sure, are at least in progress. Registration with the IRS is the next step. File Form 8957. Name your responsible officer, points of contact. To back up, your first step is going to be to figure out your organizational structure, most likely, and how you're going to actually go about registering. Enhancement of customer due diligence processes, so your new account onboarding, what do I need to collect, what do my data management systems look like, what are my fields, et cetera, et cetera. Your upgrade of your data management, data collection systems is going to go hand in hand with that, probably occur simultaneously. One-time review of your pre-existing accounts, both entity and individual, based on threshold. In just a second. Customer outreach to obtain documentation, ongoing monitoring of the Fatca status of your account holders, and then planning on preparing for withholding. Now, withholding hopefully will be a very limited reality for all of you, based on the fact that the Model 1 IGA is supposed to come into effect, but it's still a certain, may still have certain withholding duties under that IGA, so we'll talk a little bit about that. All of these are intertwined. It's really hard to separate them out one from the other, but this is just kind of a roadmap for that compliance. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to jump in here with a minute? Okay. So let's talk about what to expect with the Model 1 IGA then, and we'll come back to the whole Fatca compliance roadmap. So it's going to be easier for you, and it sounds like the Model 1 IGA is definitely a reality, so I have some slides on what happens in case of emergency and the IGA fails, but that doesn't sound like it's likely to occur fully. So ignore those slides when we get to that. It's going to eliminate, for very basically, for anyone that's not familiar with what the Model 1 IGA does, it's going to eliminate your need to report directly to the IRS. So you're going to be conducting reporting to your own tax authority. Any nation with a Model 1 IGA reports to their tax authority rather than the IRS. They don't enter what's called an FFI agreement, and this is this document that says I comply with all these steps of Fatca, under payment withholding, et cetera, Instead, they're what's called registered deemed compliant. And that means you still have to register with the IRS, but you're automatically deemed compliant with the terms of Fatca based on your nation signing this IGA. IGAs vary in significant ways, so if you are part of a global financial institution, if you have affiliates in other jurisdictions, their IGA might be much different than your IGA. Annex 1, Annex 2 are going to be like a few differences. The body of the IGA is going to be largely the same between countries with Model 1 IGAs, but Annex 1 is going to lay out specific due diligence requirements. That includes the reporting procedures that your institution will use to your tax authorities, as well as what's acceptable forms and documentation to use to do all that stuff. Annex 2 is going to have your list of deemed compliant exempt institutions. Don't have any Fatca requirements. It's also going to have products that are exempt from Fatca, as Dr. Roll talked about. IGAs come in two types. Model 1A requires reciprocal reporting by U.S. financial institutions. Your version is non-reciprocal, so your institutions will not your tax authorities will not be getting information from the U.S. You will be giving it to the U.S., so I apologize on behalf of the United States. Doing this all to you and giving you nothing in return. But that's obviously a choice of which one you want. So reciprocal is an option that I guess Treasury developed in order to kind of lure some countries into Fatca compliance. Because some countries might have a lot of persons with accounts held in the U.S. that they would like information on. It might be a benefit to their tax authorities. So Model 1A, the U.S. will be exchanging information with U.S. financial institutions will be required to go through a similar process of identifying citizens with tax liabilities in a Model 1A jurisdiction and reporting it to the IRS, who will then reporting on to those nations' tax authorities. However, there's no full reciprocity. Again, I apologize on behalf of the U.S., but we're not giving anybody the same information that we're asking for in our reporting. I can't really explain why, but that's what we're doing. So Fatca partner nations under your IGA are going to, or under an IGA, apply domestic penalties on compliant institutions, so it's really taking away the threat of having to answer the IRS. This is Form 8957. I'm sure most of you, many of you might have seen it or looked at it at this point. It's simply called Fatca registration. It's not actually a very long form, it's one of the simpler Fatca forms out there. All of these are on one IRS site that's actually kind of a pain in the butt to navigate, but it's all there. You can go there and get all of them in one place. And FFIs are required to file this, even you guys under Model 1, and you file it through their online portal. You indicate that you're a registered deemed compliant financial institution in Part 1, Section 4, and designate a responsible officer. Now, as we talked about in the morning, you still have to register designated responsible officer. Just because you have the Model 1B agreement coming or pending, when you register, you still have to name responsible officer. Now, the duties of the responsible officer we'll talk about, just so you all have an understanding of what it means if you didn't have an IGA in place. But since you do or are going to have an IGA in place, it's not going to look exactly like that. It's mostly going to be a point of contact with right? So still have to deal with that. Withholding. Withholding is largely going to, the threat of your institution being with having their U.S. source income withheld is largely going to be lifted by the fact that a Model 1 IGA is pending. So you'll be considered registered to be compliant. However, the IRS can still put an institution from a IGA jurisdiction on a list of non-compliant institutions should it choose to. So it's not a get out of jail free card, but it's you have to I feel like I can't say what the IRS is going to do, but I feel like you're going to have to really screw up to be put on this list. You have 18 months to remedy non-compliance if the IRS should contact your tax authorities or your responsible officer and indicate issues or errors. So this 18 months should theoretically give enough time for most FFIs to come into compliance. You don't generally have to withhold on or close recalcitrant accounts under Model 1 IGAs. Reversed, right? Non-consenting is Model 2.
No, it's the other way around.
Okay. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. You want to clarify that? Yeah.
I was just mentioning that the recalcitrant account, that terminology is used for Model 2, and it's non-consenting accounts that use the Model 1.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So yes, non-consenting accounts, not recalcitrant accounts. But you don't generally have to close these accounts. These are people that do not provide documentation or information. Sorry, these are account holders that do not provide documentation or information to confirm their tax status, non-consenting accounts. Due diligence, you still have to review all your pre-existing accounts under Model 1 agreements for U.S. indicia. If your indicia are found, you can choose, elect to treat any account with U.S. indicia as a U.S. person under FATCA purposes, if you so desire, and therefore just report them. If you want to go further, you can, but it's your option. You need to have procedures in place to collect TIN numbers, tax identification numbers, by January 1st, 2017. There's due diligence procedures for pre-existing accounts based on high value, low value status. 1 million or more considered high value, lower value between 50,000 and 1 million, and as we heard, anything below 50,000 is not subject to FATCA reporting at all, so you don't have to worry about that. So your first step is going to be to figure out your universe of accounts in scope, and then narrow down to high value, low value. Now there's an element of aggregation to this. You're supposed to aggregate to the degree that you can under your electronic records. So you have to search your electronic records that link individuals, account holders, not just individuals, and aggregate in order to get to these numbers. So it's not just, okay, one account has under 50,000, the other account has under 50,000. If you aggregate a bunch of accounts and they go above 50,000, you have to report that. So that's an important step that you'll have to take.
That's an important point, because the account holder does not avoid that. They do not avoid the idea of reporting or withholding because they have less than 50,000 in 5 different accounts. But you have to add these numbers up to ensure that they come within the scope.
And the requirement to aggregate is, like I said, electronic. It's also you're supposed to ask your client relationship manager to any knowledge of connection between these accounts. So that's another step you take during aggregation. Under most Model 1 IGAs, your due diligence on lower value accounts is going to be satisfied by an electronic search, so you don't have to go back through paper records. Higher value accounts, you have to go back through paper records for 5 years. Yeah, right, yeah, so that doesn't necessarily mean that much.
The smaller institutions that may not have the
Right, so yeah, if you don't have the electronic records, it doesn't really mean anything for you. In case you do have this fancy system, but Entity accounts, if you are searching your accounts and you identify FFIs as partner nations, they're considered compliant. FFIs outside of partner nations are going to need to certify their status through forms. For example, we'll talk about in a second. Passive NFFs. Passive NFFs. Got it. Require FFIs and partner nations to determine the controlling persons and identify the beneficial owners down to 10% ownership stake, which is pain, probably in many cases, but that's a requirement. And you can do that under most Model 1 agreements based on your existing AML and KYC documentation and procedures. So you can go back through, again, this is another area where AML and KYC plays a critical role in Fatca. This is where you're going to be going through this documentation, in addition to a lot of other places and steps during Fatca compliance. So if there's any reason, if you know or have reason to know that your evidence is false or reliable, obviously you can't rely on it. So, yeah.
I'd just like to expand on that a little bit. Not only can you not rely on the certification, you have to make sure that you have collected the proper documentary evidence to begin with, and then you have to monitor to ensure that that has not changed, because from time to time the status of an entity or an individual does change, and they could in fact become U.S. person, U.S. residents, or have U.S. indicia over time.
Brian, let me interject here. If anybody wants to ask a question, this is a great opportunity. We'll give you the answer if we can, or promise to send it to you later. I also wanted to let you know that there are various resources that you have available to you that you should keep in mind. Some of them are off the beaten path, such as your own embassy in Washington, the U.S. Embassy here. The U.S. Embassy here, I believe, has an IRS attaché, for example, and an FBI attaché, or if you fail in reaching the officer that you want to reach, you always ask for the Deputy Chief of Mission, and she or he will direct you to the appropriate place. In other words, work smart. Think of where the resources might be. Think of other neighboring countries or countries with which you have connections that may have done it already, where you can borrow their best practices. Right?
Yeah, so as we already talked about, you don't need to be waiting for the IGA, although it sounds like it's very close in order to be implementing your banking compliance steps. You can do a lot of stuff right now that doesn't require an IGA to be in place. You can assemble a team responsible for banking compliance, create a budget, et cetera, et cetera. You can name your responsible officer, or at least identify that person who's going to play that role, the main point of contact with the IRS. You can gather data required for account due diligence, design and implement your new ongoing customer, or your new customer onboarding steps so that you'll capture information on a customer's Fatca status. You can upgrade your data management systems, conduct a gap analysis to see what customer data you're currently gathering, what you need to be gathering, and you can review your pre-existing reporting processes to make sure that they're going to be sufficient in order to report information down the road. So all this stuff, you don't need to wait on an IGA to do. You can be doing it right now. Just know that that's possible. It's not all about waiting on an IGA, really. Train your staff, yes. Good, very important point. Train your staff. What happens if an IGA is not finalized or agreed on in substance by this date? You could be subject to withholding if you have not registered and did not receive a June number. So worst case scenario, the common problem scenario is this. Down the road, you might get withheld on because you're considered non-compliant with Fatca if you didn't make the July 1st deadline. Your withholding tax is going to be on fixed, dependable, annual, or periodically U.S. source income. It includes all that stuff that's listed there: dividends, rents, salaries, annuities, royalties, et cetera, Even further out, we're going to get into the gross proceeds territory, where your withholding is going to be on gross proceeds from the sale of a property or asset that produces U.S. source net income, which includes all sorts of stuff like stocks and U.S. securities, intellectual property that you hold in the U.S., a whole universe of stuff that you don't want to be withheld on, essentially. So gross proceeds is the really bad part of withholding. This is the pretty bad part of withholding. But anyway, again, under the Model 1 IGA, we shouldn't really be dealing with this that much. So cross-check. withholding tax is going to be imposed by the U.S. payor at the time of payment typically. So U.S. withholding agents are largely going to be responsible for withholding on payments to your institutions. Your institution is also responsible for some withholding as well, even if a Model 1 IGA doesn't take place. I'll talk about in a second. You may also lose correspondent relationships with U.S. institutions. You might get cut off because a lot of institutions have already, or reportedly already said that they will not conduct transactions or do business with people that are on this package. So step one. But yes.
Even though we're signing a Model 1 IGA, it's important to know about the other models and what else is going on for other entities and other jurisdictions, because you may have clients that it will happen to, and you're going to have some sort of understanding as to why they're being withheld upon. You may hold an account for them somewhere else, and all of a sudden, the money isn't there. They have withholding going on, and you don't know why. So it's just important to have a little bit of knowledge of why, the way all of them work, just so that you know what's happening.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what we'll get into next, essentially. We'll talk about, so that's all Model 1 stuff. The rest of this stuff is going to be Fatca under the final regulations, really. So all from here on out, almost everything I say is going to be tailored to your requirements under Fatca final regulations, not covered by IGA. So this is the definition of an entity under Fatca. I think we already covered this. We'll also be emailing these slides out to everybody after the fact. So if anybody wants to look at this, you will get this stuff. So don't feel like you have to write this down or remember it.
Keep in mind that all these are disjunctive. In other words, it's this, or this, or this, or that. They don't all have to be present.
Yeah, that's an important point. And it says it holds financial assets as a substantial portion of your business. Substantial portion is 20% or more of your gross income in a 3-year period derived from holding accounts and related financial services. So this includes all sorts of investment vehicles that, under a lot of regimes, are not considered like financial institutions. Some of you are probably as representatives of those institutions in the audience here, so you already know this. So immediate steps, again, just to back up and go back through your immediate steps, and just to reiterate where we should be at right now or where we should have already been. My recommendation, I guess the recommendation of most experts, would be that you should already have begun or completed your Fatca planning process. That includes identifying your departments with primary responsibility, building a team, a steering committee, designating some member of, ideally, unless you senior management, who has adequate responsibility, autonomy, and resources to oversee this, and evaluating your external and external expertise. You're going to need to do this and make sure you're budgeted. Hopefully that's already been done. From there, you probably want to register with the IRS. And again, I'm giving this advice from the non-IGA jurisdiction level here. So imagine that we're in a country where they don't have an IGA. This is what I recommend you do. So identify your Fatca status and coverage by an IGA if it's in place. Identify how you're going to register. You're registering as part of an expanded affiliated group, a sponsored entity, or a single FFI, or one of the deemed compliant categories. We'll put that at the end in case anything falls into this. So an expanded affiliated group in very general terms is just a group of entities or companies linked by common ownership to a parent. Many of you are probably going to be registering under this structure, and how it works is essentially a lead of this EAG registers. It lists its members of the EAG, and it essentially, in many ways, the lead is going to take on primary responsibility for Fatca compliance on behalf of its EAG. So if you're a lead entity, you have a lot of responsibility and potentially a lot of liability if something goes wrong as well. So it's a major role. Interestingly enough, some U.S. institutions are taking on this lead role on behalf of their non-U.S. institutions. So it's not just a non-U.S. institution responsibility. Select your Fatca responsible officer. Any other points of contact, you can list those on IRS Form 8957 as well, and that's going to be who the IRS is going to come to with any issues of compliance, errors of reporting, et cetera, et cetera. File this in the online portal, obtain your JID number. Your GIN is what you're going to present to anybody else to certify that you are Fatca compliant, essentially. It's what you're going to list on your withholding certificates, your W-8-E, whatever it is that you need to present to say, hey, you know, I'm registered, I'm good to go. Don't file paper copies in case anybody wanted to file a paper copy. The IRS says don't do that. It will delay, it can potentially delay your registration and delay your GIN. Duties of the Fatca responsible officer. If, you know, again, this is not necessarily going to be, you know, your responsible officers or you, if you're the responsible officer. But if you're in a, you know, model, or if you're in a jurisdiction not covered by a IGA, this is what the responsible officer has to do. And Charlie calls it a new promising occupation.
I think for those of you in the room that are looking to find new fertile ground to grow your career, and I see several of you nodding your head yes, and actually correcting Brian on something, such as our friend here. This, in my opinion, is going to blossom into a major, well-paying career. In fact, just as a little personal anecdote or business anecdote, we have issued our Certified Financial Crime Specialist certification about 9 months ago. It's already held in 70 countries, and we're thinking, based on the advice of some of you here in this room, we're not thinking, we've been talking about it, frankly, of issuing a sub-certification on Fatca only, because this is a worldwide concern that every financial institution in the world is going to be thinking of or actually complying with. So for those of you who develop a skill and a knowledge in this field, you're going to be worth your weight in gold times 10. Fatca to Gatca. That's it. Career to riches in your career.
So responsible officer, a new promising occupation. This is what you have to certify, and this is supposed to be done within 2 years and 60 days that you enter a change order agreement with the IRS. And then you have to recertify every 3 years. So you completed your review of all pre-existing high-value accounts and the other accounts after that, and we'll look at the dates of when you have to do that in a second. And then also you have to certify that you didn't have formal or informal practices in place to help account holders engage Fatca. And you have to get some kind of written documentation that you did this, you know, you checked on this. So as a responsible officer, you have to email business lines or get them to sign a form or something, talk to relationship managers. You need documentation in place to show that you actually made this effort, or else, you know, you can end up in trouble if it turns out you did have formal business or practices in place to help account holders be effective. Yeah.
Just to say too that even though under the IGA we may not have the exact responsibilities of the person of the responsible officer, there will be some person that is very similar to the responsible officer with pretty much mirroring the duties, but maybe not having the same liability as in the responsible officer that's
Yeah, so ultimately the RO, the responsible officer, is going to answer to the IRS, or in your case, your jurisdiction's tax authorities, for the errors in Fatca compliance. The IRS can potentially revoke Fatca status if certifications are not accurate, complete, and you might have other practical duties as well as the responsible officer, depending on how your institution structures it. Due diligence steps. July 1st deadline, whether you are covered by an IGA or not, you actually need this stuff in place for the most part. You're going to have new customer onboarding, new account opening procedures in place to identify the Fatca status of your account holders or your clients, whatever it is. And you need to gather documentation to confirm the status of U.S. person or claim of foreign status. Generally, this is going to be a withholding certificate. Now, under IGAs, you can use alternate forms of documentation to confirm Fatca status. So it might not be an IGA. That's going to depend on it might not be a withholding certificate, an IRS withholding certificate. It might be another type of documentation. So look for that information in Annex 1 of your IGA once it's issued. But W8, W9, all these forms that we'll talk about in a second are possible ways to confirm someone's Fatca status. again, this is another area where your AML KYC staff and your AML KYC function is probably going to come into place in terms of augmenting your due diligence. And again, you might have to upgrade your data management systems to include new fields about someone's bank status, capture the information required on these withholding certificates, make sure that you have some way to monitor FATCA status on an ongoing basis, so that, you know, someone's FATCA status changes, it's flagging that in some kind of client relationship management system, or however you're going to do it, so that you know if their status has changed. So all these are considerations when you're when you're augmenting your due diligence in preparation for FATCA. FATCA is a huge data collection challenge, as I'm sure I don't really need to tell anybody here. You need in many cases, you're going to need a lot of data on a customer that might not necessarily be all in one place. So conduct a gap analysis, see what data you have and don't have. You might have to collect customer due diligence, or you might have to collect customer information from multiple affiliates, potentially between jurisdictions, potentially multiple languages if you are in a large financial institution. And you're going to have to put that all in one place. Based on what I've heard from larger institutions, some of them are building like a FATCA data warehouse and dumping everything in there in one central location. And in some cases, this is going to be like a lead of the expanded affiliated groups, potentially. And there's lots of vendors out there who offer assistance with data management products, third-party data sources that you can bring in, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, you can consider that as part of your FATCA planning process.
Okay, it's a logical breaking point in our slides, and I thought that you've been absorbing so much that it might be time to ask for you to come up with some questions that you can try to stump us with. Are there any that you have, please? Yes, sir. Maybe, I wish our audio guy was here so I can borrow it.
My question concerns the item that's on the screen right now. What do you do when you have a signatory who is a non-US person and does not want to sign the WA-BEN because he's not the beneficial owner? The beneficial owner is another person. And the regulations seem to ask for a WA-BEN from anybody with authority over an account.
Right. Did he stump you?
Yeah, that's a question. Right, so this is an account of an individual.
Correct.
And they are the person with authority over the account, but they're not the beneficial owner. But so, yeah, I mean, is there U.S. engagement? No. I mean, yeah, then you don't necessarily need a WA-BEN to procure the account. Well, yeah, under an IGA, typically under Model 1 IGA, you're going to be able to use other documentation to confirm a claim of foreign status. And that can include a number of different things. I don't know what your Bahamas IGA is going to look like, so I can't say exactly what it would be, but you're not necessarily going to need an IRS form WA-BEN. Now, as to the larger question of it asks for a beneficial owner, does it have to be the beneficial owner, or should it be the person with authority over the account? I don't know the answer to the question. That's a really good question. So the question is,
Another question? We got some good stuff coming up, folks, so don't start stranding.
I'm just wondering if it would come down to control at the end of the day.
I'm sorry?
Who has control of the account?
Who has control of the account?
yeah. So in other words, the person that would file or be responsible for filling out IRS form WA-BEN would be the controlling person of the account. That's what I would say too, which would be the person with authority over the account, even though it's requested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to,
Yeah, you want to clarify?
Say that unless the signatory is domiciled in the U.S. and then you hire anybody else tonight, and they're domiciled outside of the U.S., under Model 1 IGA, we're not asking for WA-BEN, non-joint declaration.
all right.
So
One word of warning, by the way. be on the lookout for any employees, I don't mean to be paranoid, any employees who might have a very close relationship with a customer, and the manipulation of data, and the, as lawyers call it, the spoliation of data. That is the manipulation and the destruction or the jigging of the data so as not to provide a true picture to either your own tax authority or the Internal Revenue Service. That'll put you from the frying pan into the fire, because then you're obstructing justice and getting into all kinds of problems. So you need to be sure that your e-disclosure or e-discovery procedures have the highest integrity, and that nobody from the IRS or your own tax authority is going to go in and see, and they'll detect it, go in and see that the data has been manipulated. Another internal concern, that's where your enemy, your internal enemy, your enemy from within, can put you in a lot of hot water as an institution. Right?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, again, this is a form to be used under Fatca as indicated in the final regulations. Under Model 1 and some Model 2 IGAs, we don't necessarily need this from a non-US person to confirm their Fatca status. However, under the regulations, you're supposed to collect this from a non-US person if it's called what's called curing documentation. So if the account displays US indicia, which we'll talk about what US indicia are in just a second, if you do that electronic record search and you find an account with a US phone number attached, and you're like, oh, what's going on with this guy? He's a US person, you can request this form from the customer, W8 then, only to be used by non-US individuals. And that will certify, that will verify that they're not a U.S. person, cure the indicia of the account, and you can move on and say that account's on. Form W8 Band E essentially serves the same purpose for entities. Again, an entity that has U.S. indicia attached to it. This form will be the curing documentation that you need to collect. It's a miserably complicated form if anybody's looked at it. It's like 10 pages long. There's like a million fields that you can select from. It's horrible. But anyway, its use is essentially the same as the W8 Band, except it's an entity. W8 IMY is a foreign intermediary form. Essentially, this is a non-U.S. intermediary that's going to be handling U.S. source income, and this is what they're going to use to provide their Fatca status to withholding agents or FFIs or other institutions. So it's kind of similar to the W8 Band E band, except for intermediary institutions, if you're qualified intermediary, for example. W9, this is what a U.S. person will submit to confirm their U.S. status. And this is what you're going to collect from account holders on an ongoing basis, again, pursuant to the Fatca final regulations, not necessarily to an IGA, but under the final regulations, you'll get this from a person who says they're a U.S. citizen, for example. You'll say, okay, give me your W9. And this is where you'll get the tax identification number that you're required to collect by January 1st, 2017 as well, from the W9 form, or potentially alternate documentation, but it's one document that you can use. This is where you report withholding, used by withholding agents, both U.S. and non-U.S. withholding agents, to report Fatca-related withholding. You actually file this with the IRS and with the payee that you withheld on, so they both get it. And we'll look at the dates on withholding, but withholding is generally going to start on March 15th. So you file this on March 15th, and then annually thereafter, March 16th, or March 15th, 2015, sorry, and then March 15th, 2016, et cetera, et cetera. Withholding is going to phase in. So this 30% withholding tax, it starts with FTAP income on certain accounts, and then it gets more accounts, then it gets more accounts, and then it eventually gets to gross proceeds. Withholding on gross proceeds, which is, again, the most tricky one. And then I think even further past that, or it might be around the same time, is withholding on what's called foreign pass-through payments, which are just super annoying. But we'll look at that in a second too, hopefully. Yes. Now it's different. I think it's different under different IGAs, to be honest with you. I think I've seen under some IGAs that they're considered valid indefinitely or up to 3 years. Yeah, 3 years. Yeah, so 3 years, but I guess best practice is you collect them for a year. that's probably a better recommendation.
Most institutions.
Okay, yeah, so it's like the manual. Thanks, Tony. But 3 years.
Speaking of years, there's a 5-year statute of limitations in the United States for these types of situations, incidentally, so the authorities would have up to 5 years to pursue any violations under these laws. The regulations, by the way, are issued by the Internal Revenue Service, and they're a daunting, complex document. 545 pages, is that right, Brian?
44.
544 pages of gobbledygook. You can't figure out. So, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, and again, as Charlie mentioned earlier, that on many of those forms, not all of those forms, if I'm not mistaken, there's a signature line that requires you to verify that, to the best of your knowledge, the information is accurate. So, again, there's, the threat of criminal action if, the form is not accurate. How likely is that? We don't really know yet, but it's there. IRS Form 8966 is a key reporting form that you would use as an FFI to report your U.S. account holders to the IRS. Again, if you don't have an IGA in place. So anybody that's not covered by an IGA has to file this with the IRS annually and report, their account holders. And that includes their balance, their account number, their name, their address. Eventually, it's going to report payments into the account, including interest, dividends, and gross proceeds. But again, that's kind of phased in with dates down the road. It also is used to report certain types of accounts in aggregate, so you're not reporting the name and number of the account, but you check a box that says I'm reporting dormant accounts, or I'm reporting recalcitrant accounts for NFFEs, and you put all, the balance of all those accounts and the balance of the payments, or the amount of payments into those accounts, and you file the form. Again, your reporting is going to look at an IRS Form 8966, most likely, because of the IGA. Right, yeah, under the IGA, whatever your reporting form or format that you do is going to be reported directly to your tax authority, and then they're going to pass it on to the IRS. So, no. And for anybody that advises U.S. persons, there is in case there's any tax advisors or CPAs or anything in the audience, there is an individual requirement under Fatca for U.S. persons to file a form, and that's this form, IRS Form 8938. Statement of specified foreign financial assets, filed by U.S. citizens, residents, and a limited number of non-resident individuals with U.S. tax liabilities to report their U.S. accounts to the IRS. It's filed annually with tax returns. This is in addition to the FBAR, which is not actually technically an IRS form, but it's another form that U.S. persons have to file to report their foreign accounts as well. So this is on top of that. So just in case anybody out there has to advise a U.S. person, they need to know that this is an element of FATCA reporting too. They have a responsibility to report their accounts now as a tax document and not just as the FBAR. So,
just out of curiosity, how many practicing lawyers are there in the room, if any? A few? And keep your hands up. How many practicing certified public accountants or chartered accountants are there in the room? A goodly number. This is your dream law. This is your dream law. And it's going to get even dreamier as the OECD standard and the G20 standard take effect. For you, people are going to need advice, not only the institutions, but also the accountant. When they knock on your door and say, I haven't been paying my taxes for the last 8 years. What do I do now? Okay.
Hopefully that doesn't happen too often for CPAs and lawyers in the room. But anyway, just some deadlines on when you have to be finished with your pre-existing account review. Your high-value accounts, June 30th. Your low-value accounts, June 30th, 2015 for high value, June 30th, 2016 for low value. So you have a little bit of time to do this. So that's why it's in the next steps rather than the immediate steps category. If you're trying to think through what to tackle first, you can kind of put this off to a degree, although it is a big job. So plan for it now, but it doesn't need to be done technically until June 30th, 2015. Yes.
And this is more
more a question that would relate to the retail banks. And that is, we have a lot of Bahamians who weren't born in the Bahamas and actually were born in the U.S., but they've lived in the Bahamas all their lives. And they possibly hold U.S. passports. In fact, most of them probably do, and there are quite a few that do. Where will they now fall as far as being a U.S. person, or is there any way to sort of move that out because they've never really had any relation with the U.S.?
Yeah, that's good spot. Yeah, I mean, I think that based on what I know, you know, so they don't. You're saying they don't have any tax liability. They haven't generated income. That's right. But they're still a U.S. passport holder, a U.S. citizen, so they technically would have tax liability in the U.S. I think they would have to renounce their citizenship to get away from this, to be honest with you, which is what we're seeing out there. I honestly believe they would be liable under, well, see, the U.S. is super weird. Yeah.
But remember, it's also worldwide.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where they come and generate, as long as you're considered a U.S. citizen, realize.
Exactly, yeah. The United States is one of them. It's one of the few countries in the world where income taxation is not a big clear.
We're almost through, folks. I see droopy eyes, so don't worry, we're almost through.
Set up a storm.
Let me, Brian, let me say.
No. I think it's relatively clear, yeah. I mean, I think the IRS is aware that people are giving up their citizenship for taxation reasons.
Brian, let me inject something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry if this sounds like a commercial, but we happen to have, we've developed, authored primarily by Brian, a training program that runs as much as 5 hours in 1 hour. I don't know who you all are, and I don't have your communication information, but if you would contact LaTanya Tinker, Simonet Tinker here, we can get information to you about that. In fact, one of the world's largest institutions that just a few days ago asked us to develop a branded, personalized, customized training program for them. It's quite good. And it's done in a very sophisticated training and development software that our instructional designer has put together. So if you want to contact us about that, please contact LaTanya, and she'll get word to us about your interest. Go ahead, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah. So when you're conducting your account review, your pre-existing account due diligence, these are the indicia that you're searching for. These are your stepping indicia based on the fund regulations. And so if you find an account with any of these, that's when you're using those factor forms to cure the account. As we saw earlier, various forms depending on the type of account holder. There's also various evidence under or various requirements under the regulations of what kind of stuff you need depending on what indicia you find. So it's in many cases goes beyond just the withholding certificate. So don't think that you just need a withholding certificate. Now again, your IGA may make this kind of move. This is a non-IGA final regulations requirement, so don't take this as this is what I have to do. It's going to depend on the terms of your IGA. This is just under the final regulations. So you'll need more in some cases. For example, if you do a U.S. birthplace, you need the withholding certificate, the IRS form, W8, W9, whatever it is, a non-U.S. passport or similar status of foreign citizenship in order to consider the account cured. So you need both more documentation beyond just the withholding certificate. You have to monitor your accounts on an ongoing basis. Once you're done your review, you have to make sure that the status isn't changing or the account balance isn't changing such that it would become a reportable account under Fatca. So if the account balance is moving above a certain amount, you may potentially have to report that account. And again, aggregation is going to be key here. So you have to aggregate accounts again to aggregate your information. So it's not just a one and done kind of thing. If someone's FATCA status changes, for example, if they renounce their citizenship, as we talked about, they may no longer be reportable under FATCA. So you need to have systems in place to conduct ongoing review, flag elements in your data management systems that may change so that you can confirm with your customers, so on and so forth. Withholding. Participating financial institutions are going to be responsible for withholding on recalcitrant accounts or non-consenting accounts, depending on terminology under your IGA. These are accounts that refuse to provide documentation or information confirming the FATCA status. You're going to impose 30% withholding on pass-through payments that your institution is paying through to these accounts. Eventually, you'll be responsible, potentially, this has not been finalized yet, for foreign pass-through payments as well. And foreign pass-through payments are withholdable, or it's going to be withholding on payments to the extent that they are attributable to a U.S. source payment. So they don't have to be U.S. source payments as, in and of themselves, but attributable to a U.S. Source payment. That probably didn't make any sense. It barely makes sense to me, but I'll do my best to explain it with a hypothetical example a little bit later in the presentation. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it your understanding that for individual clients, withholding is not relevant, but they become U.S. reportable, but that withholding only applies for legal entities that become non-participating foreign financial institutions?
So you're saying, do you essentially, if you have an individual who's non-consenting, they say, I'm not going to, give you this information.
They become U.S. reportable?
Are we talking about under Model 1 IGA? Yes.
Only
Yeah. You report them, but you don't withhold on them. That's correct. Yeah. Non-participating foreign financial institutions, now yes, that is withholding on non-participating foreign financial institutions. Yeah, her question is, under a Model 1 IGA, do you withhold on non-consenting accounts, accounts that don't, for individuals? If an individual says, I won't give you, confirmation of my FATCA status, no, you don't withhold on that. But you do report that. Yeah. So, anyway, to clarify that.
We're down to just a few slides, folks. Hang in, there's a great flow chart coming up.
It's going to be amazing.
I'm using flow charts. Using flow charts to keep me here.
Get excited now.
So you're all good. Take
Model 2 IGA, just so you know what it is, again, you may have affiliates or, relationships with other institutions in Model 2 jurisdictions. It's a different type of IGA. It was developed, generally speaking, to allow institutions with local law conflicts to reporting to the IRS, a way around it. And basically, the way that it works is that a Model 2 IGA FFI is going to register with the IRS directly. They're going to enter into a FATCA agreement, or an FFI agreement, unlike Model 1 jurisdictions. They're going to report directly to the IRS, but reporting is different. You have to obtain your account holder's consent to report. If you don't obtain their consent to report, then you just report in aggregate. So you don't report specific accounts that don't consent. You just report them in aggregate with the understanding, and you have to tell your account holder this as part of your attempt to obtain consent to report, with the understanding that the IRS can then request further information from the institution and eventually get at the individual account holder. So it's not automatically reported, but the IRS may be able to eventually, or will be able to eventually get it, is the understanding through group requests, under existing tax information exchange treaties or double taxation agreements, whatever it is. And in general, if you're dealing with institutions, FFIs in a Model 2 jurisdiction, you can generally treat them as compliant, so they're not going to be subject to withholding, et cetera, unless they're on this IRS special list of non-compliant institutions that they're going to put out at some unspecified point in the future. So just to know what that is. Pending challenges. What's coming down the road a few years or a couple of years? Preparing for withholding is going to be a huge pain for everybody, most likely. For FFIs and U.S. withholding agents, we're hearing a lot of flack from U.S. withholding agents at this point, which is a much larger universe than just U.S. financial institutions. It includes a huge range of commercial corporations, essentially anyone making payments to non-U.S. entities can potentially be a withholding agent. And they're going to have to be doing almost a mirror of what a lot of FFIs are going to be doing, but for their payees. So people they're making payments to, they're going to have to sort through them, classify the types of payments they're making to them to determine if they're fixed annual, fixed dependable annual periodical, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this whole other compliance regime for withholding agents that really is in some ways pretty difficult. And so that's causing some criticism from the U.S. side as well. So it's not just you guys that are upset about that.
And don't forget, all those withholding agents have financial institutions with whom they have relationships. So they're your customers as well. I mean, you got a big challenge out there. All right.
Foreign pass-through payments add substantial complexity, and we don't really know what's going on with them yet because the IRS in its final guidance reserved the definition of a foreign pass-through payment and said, we're going to get to that later. Even though this is final guidance, we're not going to tell you what foreign pass-through payments are quite yet. We'll tell you that down the road. With any luck, we won't really reach the point. I think what the IRS is thinking, not to speak for the entire government agency, but I think what the IRS is thinking is that we'll reach a point where we won't have to be doing foreign pass-through payments because most jurisdictions will be covered by some form of intergovernmental agreement. I don't know. And then ongoing detection and prevention, monitoring your accounts, flagging them for changes in FATCA status is going to be an ongoing challenge for anybody at a financial institution. And here is that flow chart. Oh, wow. There's actually two of them. Great. Yeah. So hopefully that was worth waiting for. There it is. This is just a summary of your FATCA registration process for those of you that are still going through this and need a handy way to kind of think about this. This other one summarizes very briefly your FATCA due diligence review process to lay out kind of how it works step by step. Again, I'll email me this all these out, so you want me to actually get through these. I'm not going to get through them right now. FFI is not subject to FATCA. They fall into three broad categories, and if anybody here is in one of these categories, you just sat through this presentation for nothing. But registered deemed compliant FFIs, that's going to be your Model 1s. Now, that does not necessarily mean you're not subject to FATCA, just not subject to the FATCA as written in the final regulations. Certified deemed compliant FFIs are ones, we'll get to those in a second, and then exempt beneficial owners. So let's talk about each category. Registered deemed compliant institutions, there's 6 categories. If you're a local FFI, and all of these have very technical definitions, which I frankly can't remember right now. So, there's a certain percentage threshold of how many customers you have. If you're a certain low value accounts, you only hold low value accounts. This is all in the final regulations, so I encourage you to refer there if you have a specific question on this. But these are what are considered registered compliant institutions, in addition to those covered by RPAs. You have your local FFIs, non-reporting member of a participating FFI group. So if you're within a larger expanded affiliated group, but you don't have any reporting requirements, you're just part of that group. That's one category. Certain investment vehicles, credit card issuers that aren't holding accounts on behalf of their customers where you can move money in and out of. For example, if you pay too much on your credit card and then they hold the money for you later and you can get that money out, that might make you, potentially subject to FATCA. But if you don't do that, then you're not going to be, as a credit card or card issuer, you're not going to be subject to FATCA. And then sponsored investment vehicles, part of the sponsoring sponsored entity structure, and control of foreign corporations, or under the sponsoring entity, holding them by FFI. These are all registered deemed compliant institutions. So they register, but then they're compliant with FATCA without having to take further steps in terms of due diligence, reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So the only step they have is to go through that registration process. And then you have to do this stuff too, sorry. I just slide to you by saying the only thing you have to do is that. You also have to do all this stuff too, which means your chief compliance officer must certify that you meet deemed compliant requirements when you register. You have to obtain your confirmation of status. You renew your certification every 3 years, and you agree to notify the IRS of any changes. If you're merged or acquired, then you have to notify the IRS and complete a new registration. So there is more to it than just registering. Certified deemed compliant institutions are going to mostly be your small local banks that hold low value accounts, and your sponsored investment vehicles like your feeder funds that feed into a master fund, and the fund manager is registering on behalf of all these feeder funds. That's an example of a certified deemed compliant institution. Certain other investment entities are going to fall into that category as well, and you're going to self-certify your FACT status using that form, or an acceptable alternate withholding certificate pursuant to your IGA. But if you're not covered by an IGA, you're going to self-certify your status on the WA form and say, hey, I'm a certified deemed compliant institution. Exempt beneficial owners. These are types of institutions. I don't think anybody cares what it means, but if you're a foreign government, if you're certain types of NGO or a central bank, or certain foreign state-owned retirement funds or sovereign wealth funds, for example, you're considered an exempt beneficial owner. You don't have FACT reporting requirements. Basically, this category was designed so that foreign governments are not reporting to the IRS, more or less. Sponsored entities. So we're talking about sponsoring sponsored entities before. Again, this was really designed for investment funds and investment vehicles, like groups of feeder funds that feed into a master fund are probably going to use this structure. So if you are considering this is what, if you're considering acting as a sponsoring entity on behalf of a group of funds, for example, these are your requirements. You have to be authorized to manage those funds, those FFIs, enter into contracts on their behalf. You have to register with the IRS as that sponsoring entity and list your sponsored entities under there. You have to agree to perform due diligence on those FFIs' behalf, and your sponsor status cannot have previously been revoked, which is fairly obvious, and actually can't possibly be that, but down the road. Foreign pass-through payments. Does anybody want to hear me talk about foreign pass-through payments?
No. Before we give Brian a good round of applause for that masterful display of his knowledge on this law, we're going to give a big one to him in a minute, but I just wanted to say something else, that we feel privileged, we at ACFCS feel privileged to have been asked by the Ministry of Financial Services to work with the ministry and with BACO in the creation of a financial crime curriculum that will include a major element on Fatca. And we have created it, in fact, and we have a course book that basically is the study manual that leads to the certification, Certified Financial Crime Specialist. And depending on what BACO and the ministry decide, the next session is being contemplated for June, and it will be a predominantly Fatca session of maybe a day or even more. As you can see, we rushed through this, and there's just a lot of ground to cover. So we feel privileged to be part of this interesting organization that the minister has created, Minister Pinder, and we will look forward to seeing you again in the near future. We will have regular training sessions, not only on Fatca, but on a range of other financial crimes, including FCPA, corruption, fraud, money laundering, etc. So don't think you're going to get rid of us just after this. So in any case, let's give Brian a nice round. We do have what?
I think we do have like 15 minutes.
15 minutes for happy hour.
Do you want to go through the example? I hear mixed opinions about that. All right, wow. Well, I'm going to do it to satisfy the room. So, foreign pass-through payments, back up. Oh, we have a question. Yeah. if anybody has questions, let's do that instead.
Yeah, let's go.
We'll email out these slides.
Questions?
So let's do questions, thanks for rescuing.
You gotta wrap up? All right.
My first question, if there is an account that is under the
Can you speak up,
threshold,
sir?
if there is an account under the threshold, as at the reporting period, but between that period and the next reporting period, it goes over, would you need to report that?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. Yeah, you do have to report that, which is why you have to monitor your accounts on an ongoing basis.
Even if it's below the threshold as at the next report period?
So wait, when does it go over the threshold?
During the period, in between the two reporting periods.
So it goes over, but then you're saying it goes back under the reporting threshold
By the end of the year.
by the end of the year.
Okay.
I don't think
Next
we
one.
need to report that. If it-
Ryan, we can't hear you.
Okay, so
We can't do.
So the question is, if it goes over at any point during the calendar year and then goes back under, what's the process on reporting it? I'm trying to remember what the regulations say, but I think it said, Charlie, do you remember if it goes over at any point in the calendar year? No, that's the F bar.
That's
that
the
I'm
F bar.
thinking of. I don't think under Fatca, if it goes over, you at any point during the calendar year, you have to report it.
It's not, it's when
There's-
it's reporting.
Right. If it's at the deadline of reporting, yes. But if it just goes over and then goes back down before the reporting deadline, yeah, then you're okay. But you still, I mean, again, you still kind of have to figure out.
The acronym FBAR has been mentioned, and I'm sorry to prolong this, but it's something that you should know. I'll make a brief comment. That stands for Foreign Bank Account Report, and it's a form required under the Bank Secrecy Act, and it's been in effect for years and years, and it's required by the customer in the United States who has an account in another country, and he or she must file it with the IRS by June 30th of each year. And that's a form that requires you to report a foreign account if the balance at any point during the previous year exceeded $10,000, even if it dropped below that during the year. And it's going to be an interesting interplay between that and this.
So I think we had another question back here.
My last question, let's say there's a fund that is incorporated in another jurisdiction, such as Cayman, but it's administered in the Bahamas. Which IG does it report under, the Bahamas, Cayman, or Peru?
So the fund you said is incorporated in the Caymans? It's in Caymans, yeah. It's going to be wherever you're incorporated, or domiciled, so whatever your incorporation, your incorporated jurisdictions, that's the IJ regime you're going to fall under, even if you operate in another jurisdiction.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions out there?
No? No, it's like when I used to work in Congress, when the speaker wants to pass a bill, says, any debate, hearing none, the bill passes. In any case, we would love to stay in touch with you, and both Brian and I have our business cards up here. You can share yours with us. The president of Fatca is here with us, Marcia Ferguson, and the incoming president. Aren't you the incoming president? No, who is the incoming president? Oh, no, the elections haven't been held. So, in any case, you can contact us through Fatca, or we have our own cards up here if you wish to if you wish to contact us directly. Any questions about our offerings or joining ACFCS, please direct them through Latanya, who is our main contact here in the Bahamas. And by the way, who's going to be appointed along with other distinguished people in the world to the advisory board of ACFCS in the near future.
And well, Donnie, do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up? Do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up?
You still have more. But I think,
I think you all want to go another half hour. No.
any questions after can certainly be directed to myself or the Bahamas Association of Slides, also through their website. We'll be happy to answer them. Again, these slides are going to be made available, so everybody can be smart and adapt them to their own presentation. Brian's slides are certainly very, yeah.
Incidentally, the IRS, I'm not an apologist for the United States government, although I used to work for it. But the IRS tries hard. It's got a heck of a duty here, a responsibility that Congress thrust on it back in 2010. It's overwhelmed with work. It's got so many things to do, and Congress keeps slashing their budget, so it's crazy. So, but they tried hard to develop a good Fatca site, which you can find at irs.gov/Fatca. It's very helpful. It might be a little confusing with government gibberish, but it's not bad.
It'll be interesting to see how they lead it out. Staff is now 12.
12 for the Fatca.
And all of this information that's going to them.
But just imagine this hypothetical, which I think about as a former federal prosecutor. They receive information from one of your banks about the account, let's say, of a guy who happens to be, just so I'm not a sexist here, who happens to be the boyfriend of a female governor, so I'm proper politically, female governor in Missouri. And they get that name, and the IRS punches it in their indices, and they say, wait, this guy is under investigation by the FBI for handling the corrupt payments to the Missouri governor. And that goes to the FBI. That's what's going to happen. This is going to be a series of revelations that are going to be quite interesting to behold.
Even though they say they will not use it for those purposes.
It's not in the law that they won't. And the first time that happens, you know what the United States Congress is going to do, because I used to work there too. The first time these revelations come out about some major cocaine dealer, about a corrupt politician with accounts hidden through a nominee in some other country, the Congress is going to say, wait, why isn't this being shared more freely with the other agencies? Why isn't this information being shared? These people are violating the law here. Let's break down the barriers. That's what's going to happen. Now, the other problem that you have, and I sympathize with you, is that the OECD standard that is moving around the world and the G20 standard don't necessarily mesh with the Fatca standard. So you all are facing conflicting and oftentimes duplicative, or will be facing duplicative compliance responsibilities. At some point, I think, either the United Nations or the Financial Action Task Force has got to bring the nations together and maybe come up with one global system that achieves the goals of these three distinct ongoing situations: Fatca, the OECD, and the G20.
The OECD has stated that they intend to do that.
They intend to do that, the OECD said. Well, there's hope. So it's going to be interesting to see this evolve. So I think that wraps it up, Tanya. Is that so? No?
We're just going to have some closing remarks.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
If we can just give Brian another round of applause.